It does not begin with missiles or fighter jets. It begins with a sentence that should never have aired. A senior IRGC commander admitting on state television that thousands inside Iran's own security apparatus are under suspicion for defection. In a system where every word is filtered, that is not a mistake. It is a signal. And it suggests the real instability may not be external war, but internal fracture. Stay with this because it is not one headline. It is a chain reaction. The commander spoke of mass SMS warnings, thousands summoned for counseling, arrests, weapons seizures, intelligence officers, and elite guards investigated between what he called the 12-day war and the Lion and Sun uprising. In Iran, dissent inside the security forces is treated as rebellion, not disagreement. The IRGC is not just a military branch. It is the regime's ideological backbone. If loyalty is cracking there, the problem is structural, not cosmetic. And ask yourself, why allow such an admission on state media? Was it a warning, a show of control, or an attempt to project strength that accidentally exposed fear? Meanwhile, external alliances look increasingly conditional. Reports suggest Hezbollah would escalate only if Iran's supreme leader himself were targeted. That is not blind devotion. That is calculation. Survival over ideology. All of this unfolds as nuclear negotiations remain fundamentally incompatible. Iran wants limited enrichment and retention of capability. The United States demands dismantlement of key sites, removal of enriched material, and restrictions without expiration. These are not small gaps. They are opposing endgames. And when internal loyalty weakens while external pressure hardens, the question is no longer whether tension exists. It is whether the system can still hold. Iran insists it never sought nuclear weapons. Officials have repeated that narrative for years. A religious decree banning such weapons is often cited. And yet, on Iranian television, a deputy speaker of parliament openly stated that the original goal of the nuclear program was to build a bomb. 100%. He said it plainly. The ambition was to go all the way, to test it secretly if possible, to follow a model similar to Pakistan. And he dismissed concerns about how such comments might affect negotiations, claiming foreigners would eventually find out anyway. This is not a fringe commentator. This is a senior political figure. And if that statement reflects internal reality rather than rhetorical exaggeration, then the credibility gap between Tehran and Washington widens dramatically. Because enrichment to 60% is not necessary for civilian energy production. Civilian reactors typically operate with uranium enriched to around 3 to 5%. The jump from 60% to weapons-grade 90% is technically shorter than the jump from natural uranium to 60%. The centrifuges spin either way. The difference is duration, not process. That is precisely why U.S. officials insist that enrichment capability itself is the core issue. Once you possess the machinery, the option exists. Now consider timing. While diplomats speak, the IRGC conducts missile drills, mock-ups of U.S. bases constructed in desert terrain, missiles launched at replicas, footage broadcast publicly. The message is not subtle. It is declarative. If conflict comes, retaliation will target American assets across the region, in the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, possibly beyond. Ballistic missile stockpiles remain substantial. Naval capabilities threaten shipping lanes. The Strait of Hormuz remains a choke point the world cannot ignore. At the same time, oil exports surge, discounts offered. China becomes the primary buyer. Revenues stacked aggressively, as if anticipating disruption. And in doing so, Iran indirectly pressures Russia by competing for the same Chinese demand with discounted barrels. Two sanctioned economies undercutting each other for Beijing's currency flows. Strategic alignment on paper, economic competition in practice. So here we stand, internal fractures, proxy hesitation, nuclear admissions, missile rehearsals, oil surges, negotiation gaps that look less like bridges and more like walls. The question is not simply whether war will break out. The question is whether the regime can maintain cohesion long enough to face whatever comes next. And if you followed this story this far, if you want analysis that connects these threads instead of isolating them, take a moment right now to subscribe and hit like. It helps this channel reach more people who want the full picture, not just fragments. Because here is the deeper layer. Authoritarian systems often appear strongest right before they reveal their fragility. Public displays of arrests can signal control or panic. Public confessions can signal transparency or desperation. Warnings sent to thousands of insiders can deter dissent or confirm that dissent is widespread. And when proxies signal conditional loyalty, adversaries take note. What happens if negotiations collapse? Does Washington escalate economically, militarily? Does Tehran gamble on brinkmanship, calculating that regional instability will force compromise? Or does the regime focus inward, prioritizing internal control over external confrontation? There is also the psychological factor. When soldiers begin contemplating defection even quietly, trust erodes. Commanders question reliability. Intelligence services monitor each other. The atmosphere thickens with suspicion. In such climates, miscalculations become more likely. There are reports of increased surveillance inside key IRGC units, reports of loyalty screenings, reports of internal messaging emphasizing ideological commitment. None of this confirms imminent collapse, but none of it suggests stability either. And history shows that when regimes rely heavily on elite guard forces, the loyalty of those forces is the final line. If that line weakens, everything else accelerates. We are watching a high-stakes chessboard where each move carries domestic and international consequences. The supreme leader must project control while navigating external pressure. The IRGC must demonstrate unity while managing internal doubts. Proxies must weigh loyalty against survival. The United States must decide whether zero enrichment is an achievable demand or a pathway to confrontation. China watches energy flows. Russia monitors oil pricing. Regional states calculate missile trajectories and alliance commitments. Nothing about this is simple. Nothing about this is settled. And perhaps most importantly, nothing about this is purely external. Because if the regime's own defenders are questioning the future, then the greatest threat may not be bombs from abroad, but belief fading at home. We will continue tracking every development as negotiations evolve and signals emerge. If you want immediate updates the moment new information surfaces, make sure you are subscribed and have liked this video so you do not miss what comes next. The situation is moving quickly, and the next statement, the next admission, could change everything. But there is another layer beneath everything we have already discussed. And this is where the situation becomes even more volatile. Because when a regime begins to fear its own protectors, it changes its behavior in ways that are often unpredictable and sometimes irreversible. Inside Iran, power is not concentrated in a single visible institution. It is a web of overlapping authorities. The Supreme Leader's Office, the IRGC's command structure, the Basij militia, the intelligence branches, the regular army, the judiciary, the Guardian Council, and economic conglomerates tied directly to the Revolutionary Guard. When suspicion enters that web, every node tightens. Every conversation becomes cautious. Every promotion becomes political. Every deployment becomes a loyalty test. And when loyalty must be tested constantly, it is already in doubt. Think about the internal psychology of a system like this. The IRGC is not just an armed force. It controls vast sectors of the economy, from construction to telecommunications to energy infrastructure. Its senior commanders oversee business empires worth billions. If mid-level officers are suspected of sympathizing with protesters, the leadership cannot simply dismiss them quietly. They must investigate networks. Who are they speaking to? Who trained them? Who recommended them for promotion? Suddenly, the paranoia spreads upward. It becomes about who can be trusted with sensitive assignments, who can guard nuclear facilities, who can command missile units, who can supervise drone programs. And that paranoia alone can weaken operational readiness without a single shot being fired. Now imagine that this is happening while negotiations hang by a thread. Imagine that Washington sees signs of internal instability and calculates that pressure will produce concessions. Imagine that Tehran sees signs of American hesitation and calculates that escalation will produce leverage. These are two entirely different readings of the same moment. And when both sides misread the other at the same time, history shows that the results are rarely calm. There is also the generational dimension. The younger generation inside Iran has grown up under sanctions, economic stagnation, currency collapse, and recurring waves of protest. Many of the younger IRGC members were recruited from that same generation. They have families facing inflation. They have relatives who have protested. They have seen social media narratives that contradict official messaging. When economic strain intersects with ideological fatigue, loyalty becomes more transactional. And if the regime's most loyal force becomes transactional, then its stability becomes conditional. Meanwhile, regional actors are recalculating. Gulf states are watching the missile drills and the internal admissions at the same time. Israel is watching the enrichment debate and the internal fractures simultaneously. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and even smaller states are asking one central question. If the regime weakens internally, does that make it more dangerous externally or more cautious? Historically, regimes under pressure sometimes lash outward to consolidate domestic support, but they can also retreat inward to prevent collapse. Which path does Tehran choose? And then there is the nuclear timeline itself. The technical debate about enrichment percentages is not abstract. It is about breakout time. It is about how quickly a state could move from civilian-grade uranium to weapons-grade material if it decided to do so. If trust collapses in negotiations, every centrifuge becomes a clock. Every underground facility becomes a variable. Intelligence agencies begin recalculating timelines. Military planners begin revisiting contingency scenarios. Insurance markets begin adjusting risk assessments for shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Oil futures react to rumors alone. Even speculation can move billions of dollars within hours. Now combine that with the reported acceleration of oil exports. When a state increases exports aggressively before potential conflict, it suggests preparation. It suggests stockpiling reserves. It suggests building financial cushions. And when those exports are discounted heavily to one primary buyer, it suggests urgency. China becomes not just an economic partner, but a strategic lifeline. Yet China's support is pragmatic, not ideological. Beijing's priority is stable energy flows and geopolitical leverage, not preservation of any particular regime. That calculation matters, because if instability increases beyond a certain threshold, even pragmatic partners reassess risk. At the same time, Russia is observing carefully. Two sanctioned energy exporters competing for the same buyer introduces subtle tension. Moscow benefits from high oil prices. A regional war could raise prices dramatically, but it could also introduce unpredictable shifts in supply routes and diplomatic alignments. Strategic partnerships are rarely simple alliances. They are layered with competitive interests. And in moments of crisis, those layers surface quickly. Internally, increased surveillance inside elite units can produce unintended consequences. Loyalty screenings may remove suspected defectors, but they also create resentment. Officers who feel mistrusted can become disillusioned. Promotions delayed for political reasons can demoralize rising commanders. When trust erodes inside a hierarchical force, cohesion weakens quietly. No dramatic announcements are required. It happens in corridors, in briefings, in private conversations. And by the time the weakness becomes visible externally, it has often been building for months. Now consider the symbolic dimension. The admission that thousands were summoned and warned sends a message not only to insiders, but to the broader population. It inadvertently confirms that dissent is not isolated. It confirms that skepticism exists even among those tasked with suppressing protest. That realization alone can embolden civilian opposition movements. If ordinary citizens believe that elements within the security forces are wavering, their own risk calculations change. Protest becomes less suicidal and more conceivable. That psychological shift can alter the trajectory of domestic unrest dramatically. But here is the other possibility, and this is where the uncertainty becomes profound. The regime may respond by tightening control beyond what we have seen before. Expanded digital surveillance, expanded arrests, expanded ideological campaigns, purges within ranks, public loyalty oaths, high-profile trials designed to intimidate. That path can stabilize a system temporarily. It can also deepen resentment long-term. Which effect dominates depends on economic conditions, elite unity, and external pressure simultaneously. So ask yourself this: are we witnessing the beginning of a controlled recalibration, or the early phase of a cascading loss of confidence? Is the public admission a calculated deterrent or a sign that control is slipping? If negotiations collapse, does internal instability restrain escalation, or does it incentivize a dramatic external act to restore authority? These are not academic questions. They determine whether the next headline involves renewed talks, limited strikes, proxy escalation, or something far more destabilizing. And here is the most critical factor: time. Every passing week without resolution compounds pressure. Sanctions continue to weigh on the currency. Inflation erodes purchasing power. Youth unemployment fuels frustration. Military drills fuel suspicion. Diplomatic statements fuel uncertainty. In such environments, tipping points are rarely announced in advance. They emerge suddenly from accumulated strain. If you have been following this entire breakdown and you value deep analysis that looks beyond surface-level headlines, this is the moment to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. The algorithm pushes content that sparks engagement, and this conversation matters, because the truth is, we are not just observing a geopolitical dispute. We are watching the intersection of internal legitimacy, military capability, economic endurance, and international negotiation. Each piece influences the others. A miscalculation in one sphere can ripple across all of them. And if the regime's inner circle senses that loyalty cannot be guaranteed, their strategic choices may shift rapidly. So what comes next? Will negotiations stretch on in fragile stalemate? Will a symbolic concession create temporary relief? Will a sudden strike change the calculus overnight? Or will internal developments inside Iran reshape the entire equation before any external action occurs? We are at a moment where signals are mixed, alliances are conditional, rhetoric is escalating, and trust is thin. The next phase will not simply be about centrifuges or sanctions. It will be about whether a system built on ideological loyalty can survive widespread doubt within its own guardians. Keep watching closely, stay informed, stay analytical. Because in volatile environments like this, the most important shifts often happen quietly before they become impossible to ignore.